Thank you, Scott, for that meditation. The title of my talk this morning is, How About These Jews? A Politically Correct Commentary. I know what you must be thinking. Why in the world does Anderson want to talk about Jews? Don't worry, I'm going to tell you. I want to talk about Jews because I think we have something to learn from them. This country was founded on a Judeo-Christian culture that is enshrined in our founding documents. The United States is the only nation in history to define itself as Judeo-Christians. As Christians, we get our moral values from the same place the Jews do. Their God is our God too. In fact, the unity concept of God seems to be closer to that of the Jews than perhaps to some of our more fundamentalist brethren. Our master teacher and way shower, Jesus, chose to incarnate as a Jew. In addition, as Rebecca has reminded me, January is Prosperity Month, and Jews are unquestionably the most prosperous segment of our society. Taking an objective look at the Jews is a lot easier when you give up the ridiculous notion espoused by some of our fundamentalist friends that the Jews aren't going to make it to heaven because they haven't accepted Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. It's sometimes said that you can get a sense of a nation's values by looking at their coinage. When you look at our coins, you find the words, "In God we trust," and "liberty." Did you know that the words on the Liberty Bell, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land," come from the Torah? In a time when multiculturalism seems to be the theme of the day, it's well to remember that our nation became the greatest and the most prosperous nation on earth by adhering to our Judeo-Christian principles. In Europe, the goal is equality. In Muslim nations, theocracy is sought after. In Eastern nations, social conformity seems to be the rule. But in this nation, liberty has always been the ideal. No one understands liberty better than those who have had all too little of it, and that would certainly include the Jews. The Jews are a unique people. We can get a sense of that when we review the records of the awarding of the Nobel Prize. Jews make up 0.2% of the world's population, but 22%, 197 all told, of Nobel laureates have been Jews. Of U.S. awardees, 36% have been Jews, although they only make up 2% of the U.S. population. Since the year 2000, 25% of all Nobel Prizes have been awarded to those of Jewish ancestry. 27% of Nobel Prizes awarded in scientific research have been to Jews. Remember, they only make up 0.2% of the world's population. Among female Nobel awardees, 50% have been Jews. It's estimated that 2.8 billion, that's billions with a B, lives have been saved through scientific and medical advances developed by Jews. By comparison, although Muslims make up 20% of the world's population, they've only been awarded 12 Nobel Prizes, one of which was to Yasser Arafat, whom this nation and several others consider to be a terrorist. By the way, did you know that folk singer Bob Dylan, who was the surprise winner this year of the Nobel Prize for Literature, was a Jew? Nobel Prizes are awarded to organizations as well as to individuals. Some 22% of organizations awarded the Nobel Prize were founded by Jews. Lest you think that the Nobel Committee is biased towards Jews. I should point out that 38% of the winners of the prestigious U.S. Medal of Sciences have been to Jews. A whopping 53% of France's Grand Academy of Sciences and 27% of the Kyoto Prize have been to Jews. The fact that Jews are disproportionately successful in many fields of endeavor is obvious. The statistics speak for themselves. Jews make up less than 1/2% of the world's population, but they consistently make up 20% of the Forbes 400 list of the world's richest people. In Genesis 12:3, we have Yahweh speaking to Abram. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who slight you. All the tribes of the earth shall bless themselves by you. How have they managed to accomplish so much? Social scientists have argued for years about why Jews are so successful. Some have argued that they're smarter than the rest of us, citing eugenics as the reason frequent persecutions are a thinning out of the least capable over the centuries and a tendency not to mix with the non-Jewish population. Indeed, Ashkenazi Jews have an average intelligence quotient of 127, far above the norm. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with my dad when I returned from a trip to California in the 1950s. I had remarked to him about the tremendous economic activity that was happening in California and how that state had developed so rapidly. My dad, who had a degree in economics from the University of Missouri and a year at Harvard Graduate School of Business, attributed the situation to the winnowing process that took place when the pioneers moved westward. He simply said, the cowards never started and the weak died on the way. Has such an effect taken place among the Jews? I believe that it has. Until recent years and the creation of the state of Israel, there were very few Jewish farmers. However, their percentages in medicine, law, education, merchandising, scientific research have been far above the norm. The winnowing process goes all the way back to the Exodus. Only the bravest were willing to exit Egypt with Moses, and only the hardiest survived the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness that it took to will them into a people. They learned early on that mixing with the indigenous population had a negative impact. The Old Testament books detail the difficulty that the prophets had in keeping the Jews from mixing. That attitude prevails today among the most Orthodox of the Jews. A major winnowing took place during the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonians only took the brightest and the best as prisoners, and only the hardiest survived the long march to Babylon. Hardened by their captivity, they thrived under difficult circumstances. And when the Persians came in and defeated the Babylonians, they flourished. Much of the inspired literature in the Old Testament can be traced back to the period of the captivity. Israel was restored in 536 BC by permission of the Persian king. However, they've only enjoyed periods of independence for relatively brief periods of time. First the Greeks and then the Romans turned Israel into a vassal state. Both the Greeks and the Romans found the Jews a difficult people to rule. It's said that an appointment as governor of Judea was not something that Roman politicians sought after. Historically, the Christian religion has been very hard on the Jews. They've been the subject of persecution by Christian rulers for hundreds of years. The fact that Jesus and all the disciples were Jews seems to have gotten lost along the way. They were a favorite target during the Spanish Inquisition because when they confessed under torture, their estates were forfeited to the crown. Because in most Catholic countries, they were prohibited from owning real estate, their assets took the form liquid assets such as gold and silver. Portability of wealth was a primary goal in a political system that could turn against you at a moment's notice. It was not uncommon for the king of a Catholic country to be heavily indebted to the Jewish community. The expatriate Jewish community was a harbinger of international banking. They could transfer large sums of money over international borders and even the English Channel by simply using slips of paper and a few carrier pigeons. It's said that during the epic battle between Napoleon and the Duke of Wellington, the French Rothschilds were financing Napoleon, and the English Rothschilds were known to be financing the Duke of Wellington. The Catholic Church has held the Jews responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus until very recently. That view has resulted in some really ugly circumstances. During the Crusades, the Christian knights sealed and set fire to the synagogue in Jerusalem where the resident Jews had gathered. Hundreds were burned to death. The slaughter of some 6 million Jews in the gas ovens of Auschwitz has taken place during my lifetime by a nominally Christian nation. The consequences of that genocide are currently being felt all over Europe. Many social scientists believe that Europe died at Auschwitz. We're not talking about ancient history here. Vestiges of anti-Semitism are preserved in this country even today. Many have been barred from prestigious clubs and denied important positions in government. They're a favorite target of the Ku Klux Klan. Some of you are old enough to remember the movie Gentleman's Agreement with Gregory Peck. Using his name David Green, he would make reservations in luxury hotels in New York. But on arrival and revealing himself as a Jew, he found that those reservations were not honored. What causes Jews to receive such negative treatment in our society? Could jealousy be a factor? Many social scientists can basically look to customs and culture as the reason that Jews are so successful. In the time of Jesus, only a few, all Judaism was centered in the temple, and only a few were allowed access to the sacred books. Jesus had harsh things to say about those few. He reserved some of his harshest criticism for them. But in 70 AD, upon destruction of the temple, a wide diaspora of the Jews to many parts of the world took place. And they were forced to rely on their own synagogues, their own rabbis, and even themselves in order to learn and study. They taught their children to read and write so that they could read the Torah for themselves. They were literate at a time when the general population was not. What are the things that happen to Jews? What is it that makes them so special? Number one, they're raised in strong families that insist on them doing their best in school. My mother was a Latin teacher in the schools of Shreveport, Louisiana. As you know, Latin is a kind of a prerequisite for if you're going into the study of law or medicine. Very few Jewish children got through high school without meeting my mother or one of her fellow Latin teachers. If she felt that one of the students wasn't doing as well as he should, a simple phone call to the parents took care of that situation and resulted in a remarkable change of behavior. Number two, they're critical thinkers. They argue about everything. Critical thinking skills have been honed by 2,000 years of persecution. And those who lacked the skills died young or did not reproduce. Along with Socrates, Jews believe that you learn something not when a teacher teaches it to you, but when you come to the conclusion yourself. They're known to look at both sides of an issue. and are more likely to make fun of themselves rather than others. A multitude of Jewish comedians have risen to fame talking about their mothers. It's said that Jewish mothers consider a fetus becomes a man when he graduates from medical school. 3, Jews tend to downplay their success, perhaps out of fear of attracting persecution. They tend to live below their means in the early years, with most of their assets being reinvested in the business. At some point, however, they blossom into more appropriate housing. I had a number of Jewish families on my paper route when I was a young man, and I knew that they owned prosperous stores in downtown Shreveport, but their housing was quite modest. But once those businesses became successful, they moved into much fancier housing. It's called the principle of deferred gratification. I have a granddaughter that I sure do wish could learn that principle. It's interesting to note that 25% of Americans think Jews have too much power in government and business. It's even more interesting to note that 75% of Jews think Jews have too much power in government and business. Some of that power was on display in the recent election. George Soros, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, Sharon Adelson of Las Vegas fame, Michael Dell of computer fame, the Google founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page were prominent donors to their favorite candidates. 6 of the 8 Hollywood studios were founded by Jews, and they were very active in politics this past year. Chances are, if you're sitting there this morning wearing clothes manufactured by Jewish entrepreneurs, Ralph Lauren, Levi Strauss, or Calvin Klein. Our First Lady, you may have noted if you watched the inauguration, was wearing a beautiful blue outfit by Ralph Lauren. I understand that he's been excommunicated from the liberal facility, liberal group for providing that dress. Jewish businessmen tend to make up the majority of the list of the most richest Americans. They're not adverse to risk-taking. They're allowed to approach their fellow members of the synagogue for refinancing up to 3 times should they fail in their initial attempts to fund a business. Jews believe it's not so much money, how much money you have, but what you do with it that counts. A review of charitable organizations because it would reveal a huge proportion of Jewish names. They are incredibly philanthropic. Jews believe it's, in Shreveport, when I was growing up, the Shreveport Symphony and the Shreveport Little Theater could not have existed without the substantial support of the Jewish community. So what can we learn from the Jews? 1, education is too important to be left entirely to the schools. Parents need to be involved in seeing that learning takes place. A bit less ball playing and a lot more reading might be the appropriate approach. 2, selection of a marriage partner is too important to be left entirely to the hormones. Hiring a marriage broker may be out of date, but taking a long look at your prospective partner and his or her family is a sensible thing to do. A bad decision here has bad results down the road. When you marry someone, you know that you're marrying their family as well. 3, taking business risk is okay, providing you've done due diligence in advance. Most of the big name moguls failed once or twice in starting a business before they became so successful. Number 4, maintaining your spiritual life is important to your well-being. The need to be connected never goes away and is essential for your happiness. Investing in your community is always a good idea. In closing, let me say that while I'm not a Jew in the genetic sense of the world, I do consider that I'm a spiritual Jew. I think most folks in unity and religious science are a lot closer to being spiritual Jews than you realize. Thank you.